By the time the hearing ended, Jim Jordan would go completely silent on national television for 9 full seconds, an eternity in congressional proceedings, unable to answer a single question about documents he had spent 3 years claiming didn't exist. Those 9 seconds would become the most shared political clip of the month, replayed on every major network, dissected in editorial pages from the New York Times to the Washington Post. What made him freeze? What question could possibly reduce one of the most aggressive interrogators in Congress to stammering incoherence? The answer was sitting in 4 manila folders on Jasmine Crockett's desk, and she had been waiting 6 months for exactly this moment. The House Judiciary Committee hearing on FBI oversight had been Jim Jordan's idea. He'd called it. He'd set the witness list. He'd written the opening statement himself, according to staffers who leaked it to Politico 3 days before the session. Jordan had spent the previous 18 months building a narrative that the FBI had been weaponized against conservatives, that political bias infected every level of the Bureau, that documentation proving this conspiracy existed, but was being hidden by what he called the deep state apparatus. He'd made this claim on Fox News 47 times in the past year alone. Researchers had counted. He'd fundraised on it, pulling in an estimated $3 million for his political action committee, with emails warning that the truth about FBI corruption was being suppressed. And now, in February of 2024, he finally had the platform he wanted. A full oversight hearing with cameras, with national press coverage, with the FBI director himself sitting at the witness table. Jordan entered the hearing room that morning with the energy of a man who believed he'd already won. Witnesses who were present described his demeanor as almost celebratory, laughing with colleagues, slapping backs, pointing at cameras as if to say, "Watch this." He wore his usual uniform. No jacket, white shirt with sleeves rolled precisely to mid-forearm, the studied casualness of someone who'd workshopped the look. His opening statement was 12 minutes long, delivered without notes, pacing behind the dais like a prosecutor who'd memorized his closing argument. He spoke about government overreach, about the politicization of law enforcement, about how unelected bureaucrats had turned federal agencies into weapons against ordinary Americans. His voice carried that practiced indignation he'd perfected over years of cable news appearances, not quite shouting but loud enough to signal passion, with strategic pauses for emphasis. Then he turned his attention to the junior members of the committee, and specifically to Jasmine Crockett. "I see we have some new faces on the panel today," Jordan said, his tone shifting to something that witnesses later described as condescending. "Members who perhaps haven't been through as many of these oversight hearings as some of us. Members who might not fully understand the complexities of FBI counterintelligence operations or the legal standards governing FISA applications." He didn't say her name. He didn't have to. Every camera in the room swung toward Crockett's seat. "I hope our newer colleagues will take this opportunity to learn how these hearings actually work before they grandstand for the cameras." Crockett, sitting 4 seats down from Jordan's position, didn't react visibly. No expression changed. Her hands remained folded on the desk in front of her, next to 4 manila folders stacked with unusual precision. She had a yellow legal pad positioned to her left, a pen resting on top of it, untouched. She wore a dark blue suit with a subtle pinstripe, minimal jewelry, her hair pulled back in a way that kept her face completely visible to the cameras. Witnesses later told reporters she had the stillness of someone who'd been preparing for exactly this opening. She had been, what Jordan didn't know, what he had no way of knowing as he continued his opening statement, was that Crockett had spent the previous 6 months working with 3 former FBI agents, 2 investigative journalists, and a Freedom of Information Act specialist who'd filed 127 separate FOIA requests on her behalf. Every document in those 4 folders had been obtained legally, verified through multiple sources, and cross-referenced against Jordan's own public statements. She'd organized them chronologically, color-coded the tabs, highlighted the relevant passages, and prepared what amounted to a prosecutorial brief. She hadn't told anyone on the committee what she had. She hadn't leaked it to the press. She'd simply waited for Jordan to create exactly this moment, where his confidence was maximum and his guard was down. Jordan finished his opening statement to applause from Republican members. He yielded back his time, and the chairman began recognizing members for questioning. The first 3 rounds went exactly as Jordan had planned. Republican members asked the FBI director about specific cases they claimed showed political bias. The director answered carefully, citing ongoing investigations and classification restrictions. Democratic members defended the Bureau, argued that oversight was politically motivated, and generally played the script everyone expected. Jordan interjected frequently, speaking directly to the cameras, restating his central claim that documents proving FBI bias existed, but were being hidden from Congress and the American people. When Crockett's turn came, she didn't begin with a question. She began with a thank you. "Mr. Chairman, I want to thank the ranking member for calling this hearing," she said, her voice even and remarkably quiet compared to the volume that had dominated the room for the past 90 minutes. "I think transparency in law enforcement is essential. I think the American people deserve to know what their government is doing. And I think documents, actual documents, not speculation or anonymous sources, but verified official records, are the only way we get to truth." She paused, just long enough for the room to register that something different was happening. "So, I've brought some documents today, just to help with that transparency the ranking member is so concerned about." She opened the first folder with the reverence of a scholar handling ancient texts, the paper crackling in a way that the microphones caught perfectly. "Mr. Jordan, you've stated publicly, and I have the transcripts here, that the FBI has engaged in what you called systematic political targeting of conservative Americans. You said this on Fox News on August 14th, 2023. You said it again on October 3rd. You've said it in fundraising emails, in floor speeches, and in at least 4 different committee hearings." She looked up from the document directly at Jordan. "Is that still your position?" Jordan leaned into his microphone, his expression suggesting he couldn't believe she was asking something so obvious. "Absolutely. The evidence is overwhelming." "What evidence?" Crockett asked. "Multiple whistleblowers, documented cases of—" "Names," Crockett interrupted gently. "Can you name one whistleblower whose claims have been verified by any independent investigation?" Jordan's face flushed slightly. "These are confidential sources who've come forward at great personal risk, so no names, no verified claims." "Oh." Crockett pulled a document from the folder, holding it so the FBI seal at the top was visible to the cameras. "Because I have the FBI's Office of Professional Responsibility report from September 2023, obtained through FOIA, which investigated every whistleblower claim you've referenced publicly. All 14 of them, not one, not a single one was substantiated upon investigation." She placed the report on the desk with the gentleness of someone placing a loaded gun. "Were you aware of that report, Mr. Jordan? I don't accept the FBI investigating itself. Then you'll appreciate this." She opened the second folder. "Department of Justice Inspector General Report completed December 2023 independent investigation. Same whistleblower claims, same conclusion. Quote, no evidence of political bias in the initiation or conduct of the investigations under review." That's page 247. I can read the whole section if you'd like, but I think we're all familiar with how thorough the IG tends to be. Jordan shifted in his seat, reaching for his water glass. "With all respect to my colleague, the IG has historically been appointed by a Republican administration." Crockett finished his sentence for him. "Yes, Michael Horowitz was nominated by President Obama but confirmed unanimously by a Republican Senate because of his reputation for independence. But if you don't trust him either, we can go to a third source." The third folder opened. "Government Accountability Office Review, requested by Senator Grassley, your colleague, completed January 2024. I have the full 184-page report. Same cases, same methodology, same conclusion, no systemic bias detected." The room had gone completely quiet. The usual crosstalk between members, the whispered consultations with staff, the shuffling of papers, all of it had stopped. Every camera was locked on Crockett's desk, on the folders, on the documents she was pulling one after another. "So let me ask you directly," Crockett said, her voice still carrying that remarkable calm. You've claimed for 18 months that evidence of FBI political targeting exists. 3 separate investigations, FBI internal review, DOJ Inspector General, and GAO, all found no such evidence. So, what do you have that they don't? Jordan opened his mouth, closed it, looked down at his notes, then back up. The American people know what they're seeing. Do they? Crockett reached for the 4th folder. Because I want to talk about what the American people are seeing, specifically what they're seeing in your fundraising emails. The document she pulled from the final folder was different from the others. Not an official report, but what appeared to be a printout of multiple email messages, highlighted in yellow in several places. These are fundraising emails sent by your leadership PAC between March 2023 and January 2024. 11 months. I have 127 of them here, all obtained from publicly available sources, your own campaign finance disclosures, and people who signed up for your email list. She looked up. In these emails, you told donors that you had seen the documents proving FBI bias. You told them you were fighting to make the truth public. You told them you needed their financial support to expose the corruption before it's too late. She paused. You raised $8. $3 million with these claims. Jordan's hands had moved to grip the edge of the dais. I've been very clear that... Have you seen the documents? Crockett's question was simple, direct, impossible to deflect. I've been briefed by whistleblowers who... Have you personally seen documents proving systematic political bias by the FBI? Crockett repeated the question with exactly the same calm as before. The silence that followed was total. Jordan's jaw worked, but no sound came. His eyes darted to his chief of staff, seated in the row behind him, whose face had gone completely expressionless. The room seemed to stop breathing. Reporters in the press gallery stopped typing. Members on both sides of the dais froze mid-whisper. 3 seconds. 5, 7, 9. 9 full seconds of Jim Jordan, one of the most aggressive questioners in Congress, unable to answer a yes or no question. Finally, he spoke, his voice different from before, higher, faster, the practiced confidence completely gone. The nature of classified information means that I can't always discuss what I've seen in public settings. This isn't classified. Crockett's interruption was surgical. You've made these claims on Fox News. You've put them in fundraising emails sent to millions of people. You've built an entire investigation around them. If the documents exist and they prove what you claim, there's nothing classified about their existence. She leaned forward slightly. So I'll ask one more time, and I need you to answer directly. Have you personally seen documents that prove systematic political bias by the FBI? The second silence was shorter, but somehow more devastating. 4 seconds. Jordan's face had gone from flushed to pale. His hands released their grip on the dais, and he looked down at the papers in front of him as if searching for an answer written there. I believe, he said finally, his voice barely above a whisper, that the whistleblowers who have come forward are credible. That's not what I asked. Crockett's tone hadn't changed, still calm, still measured, still carrying that dangerous softness. You told donors you had seen evidence. You told the American people you were fighting to release documents. So either you have them or you've been fundraising on a claim you can't verify. Which is it? Jordan stood abruptly. Not to speak, to leave. He gathered his papers with shaking hands, said something inaudible to his chief of staff, and walked toward the exit without asking the chairman for permission to be excused. The cameras tracked every step. His face was no longer pale but bright red, sweat visible at his hairline despite the carefully climate-controlled hearing room. He didn't look back. The chairman, clearly uncertain about protocol when the ranking member simply walks out of his own hearing, called a brief recess. But Crockett didn't move. She sat exactly where she'd been sitting, the 4 folders still open on her desk, her expression unchanged. What happened in the remaining 40 minutes of that hearing after the recess is almost irrelevant to the story, but it's worth noting because it demonstrates something important about how these moments land. The FBI director, who had been stone-faced through 3 hours of hostile questioning, answered Crockett's follow-up questions about Bureau oversight procedures with obvious relief. Democratic members asked her to enter her documents into the official record, which she did, all 427 pages of them. Republican members, to their credit, mostly stayed quiet. Several of them later told reporters off the record that they'd had no idea Jordan's documentary evidence didn't actually exist, but the real story was already over. It had ended in those 9 seconds of silence. The clip went viral within 2 hours. Not the whole exchange, the 9 seconds. Someone had isolated it perfectly. Crockett asking the question, Jordan's face as he tried to formulate an answer, the absolute stillness of the room, the mounting discomfort as seconds accumulated, the way his jaw moved but no words came. By that evening, it had 14 million views on Twitter alone. Cable news played it on loop. The New York Times ran a fact check of Jordan's fundraising claims that verified every detail Crockett had presented. The Washington Post published the full IG report with annotations showing where it contradicted Jordan's public statements. Political strategists who study these moments for a living later told researchers that what made the clip so devastating wasn't the silence itself, though that was extraordinary enough, but the contrast. Jordan had entered that hearing room as the aggressor, the prosecutor, the man with the evidence. He'd dismissed Crockett as inexperienced, implied she didn't understand how oversight worked, suggested she should sit quietly and learn. And then she had calmly, methodically, using only official documents and his own words, demonstrated that everything he'd built his investigation on was unverifiable. She hadn't shouted, she hadn't attacked, she'd simply asked him to prove his own claims, and he couldn't. 3 days after the hearing, Jordan's leadership PAC returned $127,000 in donations to contributors who demanded refunds, claiming they'd been misled about what their money was funding. Campaign finance watchdogs filed complaints with the FEC questioning whether the fundraising emails constituted fraud. 6 Republican members of the House Judiciary Committee quietly asked to be removed from the FBI investigation subcommittee Jordan chaired, and Jordan himself went 34 days without appearing on Fox News, the longest gap in his media appearances since 2017. But perhaps the most telling detail emerged 2 weeks later, when a reporter from The Atlantic obtained internal emails from Jordan's office. In one message, sent the morning after the hearing, Jordan's communications director had written to his fundraising team, "We need to pull all the FBI emails immediately. If anyone asks, we're refocusing the investigation. Do not, under any circumstances, mention the Crockett hearing." What made Jasmine Crockett's performance in that hearing so effective wasn't complexity. It was simplicity. She hadn't tried to out-argue Jordan or match his aggression. She'd done something far more devastating. She'd asked him to prove his claims using his own standards. Jordan had spent months demanding transparency, insisting that documents held the truth, claiming that official investigations couldn't be trusted. So Crockett had brought official documents from 3 separate investigations, all of which contradicted his narrative. She'd used his own rhetoric about transparency to ask him a simple question: "Where's your evidence?" And when he couldn't produce it, when those 9 seconds of silence made it clear that no evidence existed, the entire foundation of his investigation collapsed. There's a human element to this story that hasn't been discussed much in the political coverage, but matters enormously to understanding why it resonated so powerfully with the public. Jim Jordan wasn't just any congressman making unverifiable claims. He'd built a personal brand on being the aggressive truth teller, the man who asked the hard questions that others were too afraid to ask, the outsider taking on corrupt institutions. Millions of Americans trusted him. They donated money based on that trust, believing they were supporting someone fighting for accountability. And in 9 seconds, Crockett showed that the emperor had no clothes. The people who were hurt by this weren't political elites. They were the retirees who sent $25 because they believed Jordan when he said he'd seen evidence of FBI corruption. They were the small donors who trusted that their contributions were funding legitimate oversight. They were ordinary Americans who'd been told that asking for proof was somehow partisan, that questioning claims was defending the deep state, that real patriots just trusted what they were being told. Crockett's intervention said something different. It said, "Prove it. Show us the documents. If you're going to make claims this serious, if you're going to raise millions of dollars, if you're going to accuse federal agents of political corruption, you have to be able to back it up with something more than confidence and anger. The aftermath of the hearing revealed other patterns, too. Investigative journalists who'd been following Jordan's claims for months came forward to say they'd been asking the same questions Crockett asked. They'd requested interviews, asked to see the evidence, tried to verify the whistleblower claims, and Jordan's office had stonewalled them completely. No responses to media requests, no documentation provided. Just more appearances on friendly cable news, shows where he could make claims without being challenged. Crockett, operating from inside the committee system, had the subpoena power and the access that journalists didn't. She'd used it systematically, filing FOIA requests for every report Jordan referenced, obtaining every internal investigation he'd dismissed, building a documentary record that couldn't be hand-waved away. And she'd waited. This is perhaps the most sophisticated element of her strategy. She didn't release these documents to the press beforehand. She didn't hold her own news conference or write an op-ed. She waited until Jordan created the exact moment she needed. A high-profile hearing he'd called, cameras he'd invited, an opening statement where he'd made his claims as forcefully as possible. And then she simply asked him to defend what he'd said. The contrast was built into the moment itself. His aggression made her calm more effective. His dismissal of her experience made her documentary preparation more devastating. His confidence made his silence more complete. Congressional scholars who study oversight hearings later noted that what Crockett had done wasn't technically complicated, but it was exceptionally rare. Most oversight confrontations devolve into partisan talking points, with each side making claims the other side disputes, and no definitive resolution. Both sides leave claiming victory. The public never gets clarity. But Crockett had changed the dynamic by bringing documentation that couldn't be disputed. Not opinion pieces or anonymous sources, but official government reports from 3 separate agencies, including one requested by Jordan's own Republican colleagues. She'd eliminated every escape route. He couldn't claim the documents were biased because they came from multiple sources with different methodologies. He couldn't claim they were leaked or unreliable because they were official public records. He couldn't pivot to attacking her personally because she'd given him nothing but his own claims to defend. The 9-second silence became shorthand for a larger phenomenon. Within weeks, political commentators were using the phrase "pulling a Crockett" to describe the tactic of asking someone to prove claims they'd been making without evidence. Democratic strategists began incorporating the approach into training sessions for new candidates. Don't just argue against your opponent's position, ask them to document it. Cable news producers started pressing guests harder when they made sweeping claims, explicitly referencing the Jordan hearing as an example of what happens when rhetoric meets documentation requirements. The hearing became a case study in how to conduct accountability without spectacle. But there was also a darker reading of what happened that day, one that some political analysts have offered in the months since. Jordan's silence wasn't just personal embarrassment. It was a demonstration of how much of contemporary political discourse runs on claims that sound authoritative but rest on nothing verifiable. The fact that Jordan could spend 18 months making these allegations, raise millions of dollars, dominate cable news coverage, and build an entire investigation without ever having to prove his central claims revealed something troubling about how political accountability works in practice. He'd been able to do this because the incentive structures of modern politics reward confidence over accuracy, because media environments allow claims to spread faster than fact checks can catch them, and because partisan audiences often don't demand proof when they already agree with the conclusion. Crockett's intervention worked because she'd done something almost no one does. She'd called the bluff publicly, in a setting where Jordan couldn't simply refuse to answer and move on to the next interview. The congressional hearing format, with its cameras and its official record and its procedural rules, created a space where silence meant something. On a cable news show, Jordan could have pivoted or ended the interview or attacked the host. In a fundraising email, he could have ignored challenges entirely. But in that hearing room, with his own colleagues watching, with official transcripts being recorded, with cameras documenting every second, he couldn't escape. The question hung there, the silence accumulated, and everyone watching understood exactly what it meant. The story could end there, with Jordan's silence, with the viral clip, with the political fallout. But there's one more element that matters, and it happened in the final 3 minutes of Crockett's questioning time after the recess, after Jordan had left. She didn't gloat. She didn't attack. She didn't even reference what had just happened. Instead, she asked the FBI director about the Bureau's procedures for handling congressional oversight requests, about how FOIA responses were processed, about the mechanisms that existed for members of Congress to review classified information if they had proper clearance. She asked technical questions, received technical answers, and used her remaining time to enter into the record a list of 17 specific oversight requests she was formally submitting regarding FBI counterintelligence operations. The questions were detailed, specific, and focused entirely on institutional accountability rather than personal victory. It was a masterclass in what these confrontations should be about. Not humiliation for its own sake, but the use of accountability tools to get to actual truth. The viral clip would make her famous. The 9 seconds of silence would be replayed for years. But the 17 oversight requests she filed that day represented the real work of congressional oversight. Documented, specific, focused on outcomes rather than performances. In a closing statement so brief that some viewers almost missed it, Crockett said something that later appeared in more than 40 editorials analyzing the hearing. This isn't about partisan politics. This is about whether we're serious about oversight or whether we're just using it as theater. Real oversight requires evidence. It requires documentation. It requires being willing to follow facts wherever they lead, even if they contradict what we want to be true. She paused, looking directly at the camera. The American people deserve better than politicians who make claims they can't prove and then hide behind classification or anonymous sources when asked for evidence. If you're going to accuse federal agents of corruption, have the courage to prove it. If you're going to raise money claiming you've seen documents, actually see the documents. And if you're going to question someone's qualifications, this was the callback, the return to Jordan's opening dismissal, make sure your own work can withstand the same scrutiny you're demanding from others. The hearing ended 20 minutes later. The FBI director left. The members dispersed. The press gallery emptied. But Crockett stayed in her seat for another 10 minutes, organizing the documents she'd presented, making notes on her legal pad, responding to a few questions from junior staffers about how to file formal oversight requests. Witnesses who remained in the room said she had the demeanor of someone who'd just completed exactly the job she'd been elected to do. No triumph, no celebration, just the quiet satisfaction of work done correctly. The 4 manila folders with their color-coded tabs and highlighted passages were entered into the permanent congressional record that day. They're available now through the Library of Congress, all 427 pages of them, for anyone who wants to verify what was said, what was claimed, and what could be proven. That's not dramatic, it's not viral, but it's the work that matters. Jim Jordan's FBI investigation continued in form after that February hearing, but it never recovered its authority. The whistleblowers were never named, the documents were never produced. The claims faded from Republican talking points not because they were disproven, Crockett had already done that, but because they became politically toxic, associated with that 9-second silence with the image of Jordan unable to answer a simple question about his own investigation. Crockett, meanwhile, became something unexpected, a model for how to do oversight correctly in an age of performance politics, not by being louder, not by making bigger claims, but by being more prepared. By doing the homework, by asking questions she already knew the answers to and letting the record speak. That's the lasting lesson from that hearing. Not that politicians lie, everyone knew that already, but that accountability still works if you're willing to do the unglamorous work of documentation, if you're prepared to ask simple questions and insist on simple answers, and if you understand that the most devastating response to baseless aggression isn't matching it with your own aggression. It's calm, documented truth. 9 seconds of silence said more than 9 hours of shouting ever could.